It just goes to show that people want that connection beyond the episode. They want to feel part of a bigger community.
Don't look at the big businesses. Find the person. Find one person that you admire and that has a really great business model.
It really taught us about the power of an idea and the power of telling a good story and just how important that is.
Historians will tell the story differently.
I owe that woman my mental health.
Famously a Nepo employee.
Time to call the pros in.
Yeah, I think it's probably about time. Clock it.
Clock it. We'll cut that. You're listening to In the Dome with Soph and Bell, two podcast fans turned founders building the home for podcast communities.
We're taking your favourite hosts out of the studio to unpack why they got started, the fandom, the stories, and the connections that make podcasts so powerful.
So powerful that we decided to build a company around it.
Let's get into it. All right, Belle, here we are, our very first podcast episode.
So we finally did it.
We finally did it. As Miss Taylor Swift once said, it's been a long time coming.
To be compared to Taylor Swift.
That's what we do at Dome from day one, comparing ourselves to Taylor Swift. We're here at the beautiful Arm's Length, a fabulous wine bar in Potts Point, a beautiful, beautiful space for some beautiful, beautiful me and Belle as well.
Get here on a Wednesday night, $25 steak frites. You will not be disappointed.
You will not be disappointed. We're very grateful. Thank you, Arm's Length, for having us.
Thank you so much.
For those who don't know, Belle and I are the founders of Dome, a platform for podcast communities. And that word community, get used to it. You're going to be hearing it a lot. Over the course of this season of In the Dome, we are going to be speaking to some incredible podcasters and players in the podcasting space. We want to get to the bottom of how and why they got into the podcast industry, how important community is to the success of one's podcast, and understand more about the voices and the people behind the mic. But Belle, between the two of us, before about 6 minutes ago, we weren't podcasters. So what are they going to hear about on this episode?
Our attempt at being podcasters. I mean, we really get into it. We talk about our story of how we met, why we're building Dome, what we're seeing in the industry. And to your point, the power of community and fandom and how that's really going to shape the next wave of podcasting.
It's going to be a good one. So I was always really, intrigued and passionate about the idea of fandoms and how these strangers could become soulmates over a shared passion for an artist, a movie, a TV show, a book, whatever it might be. And they only needed that one thing to connect them to really feel that bond. I thought that was really powerful. So I had the idea a few years back to create Dome, which at the time was just about this whole fandom world in terms of media and entertainment. It was really broad. But I think, Belle, what aligned us was really honing in on the power of, all those things through the lens of podcasts. I think we both became really, obsessed with the idea of podcasts in this whole industry.
Absolutely. I mean, we're both podcast fanatics, right? I think we started asking those questions of, I wonder what community building looks like in the podcast space. What's out there? How are hosts doing this? How are they building these fandoms? Let the idea evolve from there and figure it out. And community is really the force behind this industry, or the next sort of evolution of this industry. But the community tools just haven't caught up. So I think we saw that really unique opportunity to understand the space and figure out where's our right to play here.
When we think about the first time we met, we met at one of the classic sort of community events, as those networking events typically are. No, they're not the most fun. No, they're not a lot of excitement happening there.
But I want to say this event was fantastic. But I think it can be intimidating.
It can be intimidating.
I think that's the thing. When you go by yourself, you don't know where the common ground is with someone to strike up a conversation.
Luckily, we found the common ground, didn't we?
Very quickly.
We found the common ground because at this networking event, which, yes, Belle, you're right, is intimidating as opposed to my more negative description. And within maybe a minute of speaking, Belle and I worked out that we both listened to Shameless Media podcasts.
Shout out girls.
Shout out girls who we love, adore in terms of their content, in terms of their business story, their partnership as well. Love the Shameless girls. And it was almost like once we worked out we both loved Shameless and listened to their podcasts, we felt this instant sense of, oh, you're like me. You understand me.
Absolutely.
And from there, it became really, really easy to evolve the conversation and kind of get into the more meaningful, authentic conversations that you would otherwise probably not have gotten to, particularly in that more stale environment.
It's sort of like a filter, isn't it? I mean, if you're listening to the same podcast, chances are you've got similar interests, beliefs, values. If we're talking about Shameless, chances are we're going to be Swifties and we're going to be talking about Taylor Swift. We're going to be talking about Alex Cooper, Call Her Daddy. We're going to be having so much common ground between us, but using Shameless as that springboard for more richer conversation.
Oh, 100%. And I think it's also, it's a great segue, Belle, because you bringing up Taylor Swift, we didn't have to tell you that Mrs. Swift has been
Period.
in the headlines recently.
When is she not?
As she tends to do.
As she deserves to be.
And it's funny because we haven't seen Taylor Swift in the headlines in a while.
Mm.
And the fact that she returned to the public sphere, to the media, through the format of a podcast. And what does that tell us about this podcast space and the power of the format?
People are sort of craving that deeper content and more meaningful conversation, how they want to actually get to know someone, how they want to relate to a personality, a brand, whatever it might be. And podcast being that format to really serve that richer conversation.
It's not even just the conversations they're having, but the environment that they're put in. It's sitting on couches in your hoodies, potentially having a drink, that yes, it might be two people doing the podcast themselves, but for the viewer, for the audience, we could do the same. And we could be sort of feeling like we're in that room, we're in our hoodies, we're in our trackies, we've got a glass of wine, watching Call Her Daddy interview, whoever it might be. And we really feel like we're part of that conversation. And I just don't think that media before this was able to capture it in the way that podcasts do.
We're already starting to see, how people are consuming their news even, right? We look to the US election and Kamala Harris being, on Call Her Daddy. Brilliant interview. We know that 44% of consumers in the US actually look to podcasts for their electoral information, which I think is just, again, speaks to the power of podcasts and how much weight there is in podcast community, in fans, and in that host to listener trust. I think it's a really unique parasocial relationship that I don't think legacy media quite understand yet.
And the best part is I think that that's only half of it, the podcast content that actually happens, on mic. It's actually what happens, I feel, beyond the mic and beyond the episode that shows the real power. I know Steven Bartlett's really lent into the idea of, in real world connections at the moment and really harnessing the power of the Diary of CEO community, one of the biggest podcast communities on the planet, to, it's not just, all people listening to a podcast, but what are the network opportunities that are within that? And recently he was airing a recent episode of Diary of CEO, a massive one. They called it the Avengers of Entrepreneurship. Hilarious.
Such a good episode.
A great episode. And they were screening it in cinemas around London.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, and that's huge. And it wasn't just about getting all these people in the same room to watch it and have the same sort of excitement that you would if it was, really a new Avengers movie. But it was what happened before that as well, because they got all these people together. And with that insight that if we're all listening to Diary of a CEO, then we're all, potentially business people, founders, operators, investors, whatever it might be, the networking opportunities that come off the back of that were huge. So they had these big, cocktail parties and networking events before screening a podcast episode. And that just hasn't been done yet. And I think we're going to see more and more of it.
Even looking at Alex Cooper, right, and her Unwell network, she's just announced her Vegas tour. Huge. She's got headline like Paris Hilton showing up. She's got all the live shows. Obviously, she's also got her own network. So I think that's interesting too, seeing creator-led networks and how Alex went from, Call Her Daddy host into Unwell. And I think, again, we'll be seeing more of that too. But it's just really interesting to see that play out and how brands then get involved and how brands show up in this space and, being adjacent to those points of talkability and those really hyper points of fandom as well.
Beyond just the typical ad reads, now we're seeing brands sponsoring an entire podcast themselves. So Bumble obviously had Give Me a Buzz with Chantel Otten. Like, that's huge. We've seen Flex Mami just come out with Swiss. They're doing their own podcast now. OPI have a new podcast now called Unpolished. Brilliant name.
Yes, love that. I think they're also set up in a nail salon and it's, having those conversations over getting nails done, like such an organic way to still bring their brand into it. But it's not a podcast about the brand and about nails.
Yes.
It's organically integrated into that sort of experience and it's figuring out, okay, what do OPI want to communicate to their audience and how can they leverage the podcast platform to sort of reach them in that more authentic way.
Constantly coming back to that idea of connection and conversation and community, I guess. And also, while we're here, guys, drinking game, take a shot every time Soph Bell says the word community. Like, let's get into it.
Let's go. Like, it'll be a fast game.
On the 4 and 6.
Yeah.
Like, that's wild.
Honestly. There's so much trust put into the podcast host that you're listening to. Like, you might not be aware of it, but I think, when you're tuning in every week, you're connecting to stories, you're hearing their advice. There's such a personal aspect to podcasting. I even think back to a really key bit of advice I got from Grace Beverly, Working Hard podcast. Huge fan of Grace. Like, when I meet her one day, That'll be my I made it moment.
Clock the when, not if.
Clock, let's go. It was a time where I was really struggling with my 9 to 5, feeling really lost, really just not in control of my career, didn't know where I was going. It was COVID. And I remember listening to her podcast and she said, treat your career in your early 20s as an experiment. Essentially, you are learning on someone else's money. And that immediately just had a reframe for me. It took the pressure off and it made me understand that I actually am in control of my career, what skills I want to learn, who I want to meet, what projects I want to be a part of, all the things. And slowly but surely, that's what sort of honestly led me to you and to Dome, and just really being open to that next opportunity, that next experience. That piece of advice really stuck with me.
Yeah. My, I guess, version of that was listening to Daniel Priestley on Diary of a CEO, again, Steven Bartlett. And he really shifted my mindset on how I should be thinking about how I want to learn. And you kind of come out of high school and you think, hey, what company do I want to go to? What businesses do I love? But he said, if you want to be a really good entrepreneur, you want to learn as much as you can. Don't look at the big businesses. Find the person. Find one person that you admire and that has a really great business model. So in other words, find someone that you think is really cool, that makes money doing something really cool. And for me, that person was Hannah Ferguson. And
shout out.
We
love Hannah.
Famously a Nepo employee. Love my mother. So that
She is mother.
She is mother.
She is mother.
And she was mother for me for a very long time. In fact, is a podcast host herself from basically the first moment of hearing her on mic, seeing everything that she's doing with Cheek and the way that she was able to build this company off the back of literally her brain, her voice. Such a massive, massive admirer of hers, and did everything I could do to get to this person. And I think Daniel Priestley's advice from that podcast really kicked that into gear. You find that person. And so I did, and I went through emails and DMs and social media and really knocked on every single door.
You stalked her, Soph.
I mean,
let's not fluff.
Historians will tell the story differently. But yeah, you could say stalked. We say something.
Harassed.
We could say harassed.
Yeah. Gave her no other option.
But successfully, I did. And I'm very grateful to have had that advice and actually actioned on it. And it came true. And I will always be grateful that I now have this amazing relationship with Hannah. And that all came from hearing those words on a pod.
Thank God you did.
And thank God I did, right? And so it's good because now after working with Hannah, and I know you sort of just spoke about where you were at with your 9 to 5, the two of us, after becoming co-founders, had this really great blend of product experience and then industry understanding and an idea that we were really, really confident about. We knew how to sell. And while we didn't have a product itself, I think what we learned in that time was how far an idea can actually get you.
Absolutely.
And not to underestimate the power of a bloody good idea. And I'm confident to say that it was a bloody good idea because where did our idea take us, Belle?
All the way to Tokyo.
All the way to Tokyo.
Could you believe it?
No.
So Red Bull have this awesome innovation comp run all around the world with founders competing to pitch their startup to a whole bunch of incredible investors and mentors and people in various different industries. That competition was such a whirlwind. The night before the pitch, we were at a sushi train. You were in your little individual slot. I was across from you.
We were on other sides of the restaurant, mate. Like we were locking in.
We were so locked in. And then we would just walk the streets for hours, pitching and pitching and pitching.
Yeah. It all really came true and really clicked for us whilst we were on stage at Tokyo Node, speaking to this audience that you spoke about, but knowing that was our first ever pitch as a company. And I think that's pretty crazy as well, having only met a few months before and then working out, okay, here we are, in twin beds in Shinjuku, Tokyo, pitching on this global stage the next day as our debut, as they say. It
really taught us about the power of an idea and the power of telling a good story and just how important that is. I don't know if we can top that.
Oh, it'll be very hard to top, Belle. And I think anytime we go back to Tokyo, if we ever do go back to Tokyo,
Off-site.
I think it'll it'll hit us very hard. The startup community itself is incredible. You hear a lot about the Silicon Valley of it all, but Sydney is doing pretty darn well on the startup space. We actually had a good experience recently with a key player in the Sydney startup space. Well, actually the global startup space, Techstars. For anyone not aware, Techstars is a accelerator program. They have a global presence. They're very heavy in the US, but they've done the Sydney cohort for a couple of years now. And if anyone has done an accelerator application process, it is
my God.
not for the faint-hearted. And in the time of this accelerator, we were building multiple different versions of our MVP. We were reiterating ideas, validating with new customers, sort of over this 12-week cycle. And it was incredible for us. It really did, just in the application process, accelerate our company forward and our vision and what we were trying to build. We did not make the final hurdle of that one, Belle. Indeed. Which was a shame, but we at Dome are big fans of feedback.
We love some feedback.
Love a bit of feedback. And the feedback that we got, I think, just reinforced to us that we were building the right thing in the right space. Look, the timing didn't work out, but the feedback we did get was really loved our team, love our relationship, and that's great. But the more exciting to us was the problem that you were trying to solve is huge. There's a lot of room to innovate in the space. Whatever you do to solve the problem that you're in, it's a real problem, and we back you to do it. And that will be a lot of what we're talking about on these episodes as well with these podcasts. Is if you're not in the ecosystem itself, it can be hard to understand what a typical podcaster is doing in their day-to-day, how they're engaging with their community, because that's such a key part of a success of a podcast. So it'll be great to sort of hear from the professionals themselves over the how, whys, and the why nots.
Cannot wait
of this
for
industry.
that.
Absolutely.
In for a treat.
Jinx, buy me a soda.
Ooh. There's a few podcasts that come to mind who are really doing this community element well and connecting with their listeners in a way that we haven't seen before. Gemma Speg, Psychology for 20s. Shout out. We love Gemma.
We love Gemma.
Gemma single-handedly got me through lockdown.
I love it.
I love it. I owe that woman my mental health.
Oh, and that's a hard front to bear. And I feel like now I hold that. So thank you, Gemma.
Gemma's like,
pass the baton.
No, you absolutely do hold that. So she's recently been doing a series of intimate dinners with her listeners. So she's done it across Sydney, I think a few other locations. I think she's in the US now and doing those now, which is really, really cool to see. But again, it just goes to show podcasts being that common ground for people to connect over a glass of wine and just it being that premise for richer conversation. So I think we should go to the next dinner.
Oh, absolutely. We will be there with bells on, glasses in hand. I think about Everybody Has a Secret, another shameless pod.
Yes.
Not even so much in terms of what they're doing beyond the episode, but actually in the episode, the language that they use. They have this brilliant technique of making the listener, even though you're sitting there, by yourself in the car, on the bus, whatever it may be, they have the language of shushy, which is what they call their listeners. So it's not, hey listeners, hey guys, hey team, none of that. It's shushies. I'm going to name you now. And immediately when you're named something, you are part of this community.
It's a camaraderie.
Absolutely it's camaraderie, but it's more than that. It's not just the shushies. They've gone, everybody has a secret, so we're going to all be here in the vault. The way that they use that language, that imagery to really paint the picture of everyone that's listening to this podcast around the world. You are in this space and you are part of this conversation. You really feel like you're at that table with them.
Yeah, we've spoken about so many awesome examples, right, of community building. I think we're only going to see that more. And I think the podcasts that are going to be really prominent in this next wave will be diving into that space. They'll be doing more intimate dinners. They'll be doing more live shows, maybe even bigger scale events. And I think it's super exciting to feel like we're on the cusp of the next wave here.
Even now, you and I have had real experience in that meetup space. Obviously, one that comes to mind for us is Maggie Sellers' Hot, Smart, Rich. Which we love.
The Aussie Angels.
The Aussie Angels coming in hot. For anyone that doesn't know, Maggie Sellers has a podcast. She's an LA-based host of a podcast and community, really. Hot, Smart, Rich. And in the past few months, the Australian listeners, particularly in Sydney, really kickstarted it. All got together for a dinner. And in that first dinner, there were, women from all sorts of industries and spaces all coming together just based off this shared love for Maggie's pod. And by the second meetup, that number of 7 women had grown to about 40 women, which was so amazing to see how that was able to evolve and how the next one, it's even bigger. Now we're doing video calls and people are networking in there and people are asking for feedback and asking for advice. And it just makes it really, for us, it's just so validating to see.
People want that connection beyond the episode. They want to feel part of a bigger community. They don't want to be solo listening anymore. They want to be a part of these shared moments together. And I think there's so much culture being built around these podcasts.
Well, Belle, we did it.
So that's a wrap.
First episode.
Done.
Clock it.
Clock it.
Well, that's really exciting. And I think the first episode, yes, it was just us, but it's just a little taste of what is to come over the next season. We're going to be interviewing some incredible podcasters that will be able to speak to the industry probably a little bit better than we do after our 1 episode run.
I think so.
Although I think
Time to call the pros in.
yeah, I think it's probably about time. Once we get these pros in, we'll have some incredible conversations. We're really looking forward to sharing with you who we've got in the lineup. Lineup. Clock it.
So what should people do, so?
Please follow us at Home of Dome on Instagram and on TikTok, wherever you're listening to this pod. Leave us a review, like, comment, subscribe, all the things. But most importantly, jump on our website, homeofdome.com, and jump on our waitlist. We've got some massive things coming out in the next few months.
So exciting.
Very exciting. And you'll be able to engage in the conversation maybe a little bit easier than you might be able to do right now.
We're Soph and Bell.
And we'll see you next time in the Dome. Amazing.